My daughter left her boy on my porch on a Tuesday in August and didn't so much as turn around when she pulled out of the drive. I raised that child for 12 years while every counselor and principal in the county told me he'd never hold a job, never live on his own, never amount to much of anything. They were dead wrong. By the time he was 17, my grandson had built something out of nothing that a company in Columbus paid him $5.2 million for. And the week the local paper ran the story, my daughter came back. She came back with a lawyer, with a folder full of papers, with a story so polished it made me sick to my stomach. My own attorney pulled me aside in the hallway and told me plain as day that we might lose. I was so scared I could barely sign my name, but my grandson just leaned over and said something to me real quiet. 4 words I'll never forget, and I had no idea what that boy had been building in the dark for years until it was already done. Before I get into what happened in that courthouse, I'd love to know where you're listening from today. Because this whole thing started with a knock on a screen door in a little town in Ohio that most people couldn't find on a map. The morning she dropped him off, I was out in the garage gluing up a panel for a set of kitchen cabinets. I'd retired 3 years back from 41 years of carpentry, but a man doesn't just stop. The hands don't know how to be still. So I'd take a job here and there, a vanity for the Petersons down the road, a built-in for the new family on the corner. It kept my mornings honest. My wife had been gone 4 years by then, and the quiet of the house was a thing I never got used to. The garage was where I went so the quiet couldn't find me. I heard the car before I saw it. My daughter drove this little hatchback that needed a muffler, and I knew the sound of it the way you know a voice. When I came around the side of the house, wiping glue off my fingers, she was already coming up the walk with the boy by the hand. He was small for 5, swallowed up in a gray hoodie even though it was 80 degrees out, and he wasn't walking so much as bouncing on the balls of his feet, his free hand flapping at his side like he was shaking water off it. He never once looked up at me. His eyes were fixed on the seam where the porch boards met the step. "Dad, I'm in a bad spot," she said before I'd even said hello. Her hair was greasy, pulled back, and she had that thin, scraped-out look people get when they've been running on nothing for a long time. "I just need you to take him a few days. A week, tops. I'll figure it out and I'll be back." I asked her what was going on, and she wouldn't meet my eyes any better than the boy would. She'd lost the apartment. The man she'd been living with was gone, and good riddance, but he'd taken what little she had with him. She had a line on a job in Phoenix, a fresh start, but she couldn't show up to a new job dragging a kid like him. And she said that like he was a flat tire. The boy's name was Micah. He was my grandson, and I'd met him maybe 4 times in his whole life. Always for an hour, always at a distance, always with my daughter hovering and snatching him back if I got too close. I knew almost nothing about him except what she rattled off on my porch like a list of warnings. He won't eat if the food touches. He can't stand loud sounds. Don't hug him, don't grab him, don't make him look you in the eye, it'll set him off. The school keeps saying autism, she told me, but they just want the funding. There's nothing wrong with him that a little discipline wouldn't fix. She set a backpack down by the door. It wasn't even half full. And then she crouched and said something to Micah I couldn't hear, and he didn't react at all, just kept rocking and staring at that seam in the boards, and she stood up and walked back to that rattling little car. I called after her. I said, "Tessa, hold on, this isn't right. You can't just..." But she was already backing out, already gone, the muffler dragging that sound down Hadley Road until I couldn't hear it anymore, and there I was. 63 years old, a widower who'd raised 1 child and figured his hard parenting days were behind him. Standing in my own doorway with a little boy who wouldn't look at me and a backpack that didn't have enough in it to last a weekend, let alone a life. That first night about broke me. I made spaghetti because every kid I'd ever known loved spaghetti, and Micah took one look at the plate, where the sauce had run into the bread, and he pushed it away so hard it nearly went off the table. I tried a grilled cheese. He wouldn't touch it. I tried plain noodles, butter, nothing on them, and he ate 4 of them, exactly 4, counting them under his breath, and then he was done. At bedtime, I went to help him into the guest room, and when I reached for his shoulder to steady him, he made a sound I'd never heard a child make, a high, thin sound like a kettle, and he dropped to the floor and pressed his back into the corner and covered his ears. I backed off with my hands up. I sat down on the hallway floor about 10 feet away from him, and I just stayed there, and after a while he stopped, and after a longer while he crawled into the bed on his own. He didn't sleep. I heard him humming half the night, the same 3 notes over and over, and I lay awake in my own room feeling like the worst kind of failure, like I'd been handed something precious and I was breaking it just by being near. Sunday came. No call. Monday, Tuesday. I tried the number she'd left and it was already disconnected. By that Thursday, I was sitting in Dr. Okafor's office at the county clinic with Micah curled up in the corner chair, and she went through the few scraps of medical paper I'd found in that backpack, and she looked at me over her glasses and asked if anyone had ever gotten this boy properly evaluated. I told her his mother said she'd handle it. Dr. Okafor just nodded slow and said, "Well, you're handling it now." That was the sentence that turned me. You're handling it now. I drove to the library that afternoon, and I checked out every book they had with the word autism on the spine, 11 of them, and I stacked them on my kitchen table, and I read at night after Micah finally went down. I read about sensory overload, about how a humming refrigerator or a tag in a shirt could feel to him like a fire alarm felt to me. I read that the humming had a name, stimming, and it wasn't him being broken, it was him steadying himself, the same as I'd hum a hymn under my breath when I was nervous. I read about routine, how sameness wasn't stubbornness, it was safety. And the more I read, the more ashamed I got of that spaghetti plate, of reaching for his shoulder, of every wrong thing I'd done in a week thinking I knew what a child needed. So I quit trying to fix him and I started trying to learn him. I found out he needed the same breakfast every single morning, 2 eggs scrambled dry, toast cut into 4 triangles, none of it touching, a glass of apple juice set down on his right side, never his left. I found out the drive to the grocery store had to follow the exact same streets, and if I took a detour because of road work, he'd come apart in the back seat. I found out I couldn't touch him, but if I waited, sometimes he'd touch me, lean his shoulder against my arm for a half a second on the couch, and that half a second was worth more to me than anything anybody had given me in years. About 3 weeks in, I came down before dawn and found him on the living room floor with a coffee can full of bottle caps I'd been saving for no reason. He had them laid out in a line across the rug, and I almost said something about the mess, but then I really looked. He hadn't just dumped them, he'd sorted them, and not by color or size like you'd think, but by some logic I couldn't follow at first until I knelt down and squinted and saw it. He'd lined them up by how worn the edges were, smoothest to the roughest, a perfect gradient from a cap that looked brand new to one that was bent and rusted half through, and every step between them was even. There must have been 200 of them. I sat on the bottom stair and watched him work, this little boy the world had already given up on, building something I couldn't have built in a week, and his humming went soft and easy, the way it did when he was content, and I thought, my God, his mind isn't broken. It's the rest of us who can't keep up. The phone rang that night. I knew it was her before I picked it up, the way you know rain's coming. Dad. Her voice was small. I can't take him back. I'm sorry. He's better off with you. I started to argue, started to say we'd figure it out together, that she could come home, and the line went dead in my hand. She'd hung up. That was the last I heard from my daughter for 12 years. I won't pretend the years after were easy, because they weren't. People ask me why I never got the legal side squared away, why I didn't file for guardianship right off. And the honest answer is I kept thinking she'd come back. Every birthday, every Christmas, some piece of me waited for that rattling car in the driveway. And there was a lawyer at Legal Aid who told me that terminating a mother's rights without her there to sign off was a long, expensive, ugly fight, and that as long as nobody was challenging me, I could enroll him in school and take him to the doctor on a caregiver's affidavit just fine. So I did it the cheap way, the trusting way, and I told myself that someday she'd want to be his mother again, and I shouldn't be the one to close that door. That decision is the only thing in all of this I'd take back, and I'll get to why. School was a war. I'll never forget the first IEP meeting, sitting at a too small table across from a principal named Aldridge, who talked about Micah like he was a problem to be managed instead of a child to be taught. He wanted him in a self-contained room down at the end of a hall, away from the other kids, where they could keep him quiet. I'd done my reading by then. I knew about the least restrictive environment, knew it was the law, federal law, that a kid like Micah had a right to learn alongside everyone else with the supports he needed. I sat in that meeting in my good shirt with a folder of my own, and I quoted the statute back at them, and I asked for a one-on-one aid and noise-reducing headphones and a written schedule taped to his desk. Aldridge looked at me like I was a fly he couldn't swat. But I had the law, and I had the patience of a man who'd already raised one kid and buried a wife, and I didn't leave that table until I got what Micah needed. He started to bloom, slow at first, then all at once. He didn't speak much, but he wrote, and his teachers started sending notes home that they couldn't quite believe. By 3rd grade, he was doing the math the 8th graders couldn't do. He'd line his pencils up by length on the desk before he started, and once he started, there was no stopping him. By middle school, he'd taught himself to write computer code off the library machines, and I'd come in to find him at 2 in the morning with the glow of a screen on his face, building things I couldn't begin to understand. The thing that changed everything started small. the way big things do. Our church ran a food pantry that delivered boxes to shut-ins on the east side, and they were drowning. Wrong addresses, double deliveries, old folks getting skipped 2 weeks, running. I was volunteering Saturdays, and one night at dinner I was griping about the mess of it, the roots, the chaos. Micah was 14. He didn't look up from his plate. He just said, "That's a solvable problem, it's just numbers." And over the next month, without anybody asking him to, he built a little program that took every address and every volunteer and every truck and laid out the routes so clean that the deliveries that used to take all day Saturday were done by noon, and nobody got skipped, not once. The pantry director told the regional food bank. The food bank told a couple of other nonprofits. Word travels in a small state. By the time he was 16, Micah had built that little route program into something real, something businesses wanted, software that could take any tangle of deliveries and pickups and make it run like a clock. He did it all from his bedroom, with 2 other kids he'd met online who were wired like him, kids the world had filed under difficult. And then a logistics company out of Columbus called Crestline Systems came knocking, and after a year of back and forth with me sitting in on every meeting in a suit I bought just for it and a real lawyer at our side, they bought what Micah had built. $5.2 million. For a boy who 12 years earlier couldn't eat spaghetti because the sauce touched the bread. I cried in the parking lot after we signed. Micah didn't understand why. To him it was just a number, a big one, the natural end of a problem he'd since he was 14. To me it was every IEP meeting, every sleepless night, every morning I'd cut that toast into 4 triangles and set the juice down on the right side. It was a vindication I hadn't even known I was waiting for. The local paper ran a story, sweet little piece, hometown boy makes good, with a photo of Micah at his desk that he hated because they made him look at the camera. It went around online, people shared it, and 9 days after it ran, the rattling little hatchback was gone, replaced by a clean white sedan I didn't recognize, and a woman got out of it who I almost didn't recognize either, until she came up the walk and I saw it was my daughter, 12 years older. Hair done now, a nice blouse, a string of pearls that didn't fit the woman who'd left a half-empty backpack on my porch, and she wasn't alone. There was a man with her in a charcoal suit, carrying a leather briefcase, and he had the smooth, sorry not sorry smile of a man who bills by the hour. I said, like it had been a long weekend, "We need to talk." The man was a lawyer named Pike, and what he laid out at my own kitchen table, the same table where I'd read those 11 library books a lifetime ago, was the most brazen thing I'd ever heard. He said my daughter had never abandoned her son. He said she'd been a devoted mother all along, that she'd visited regularly, sent money every month, called to check on Micah's progress, that she'd only let me babysit because of her difficult circumstances, and that I'd taken advantage of her hardship to alienate her from her own boy. He said she was Micah's mother and his only legal guardian, that I'd never filed a single document to the contrary, and that as a minor's parent she had a say in his affairs, including, he said smiling, his financial affairs. There it was. They weren't here for Micah. They were here for $5.2 million. I told them to get out of my house. Pike just slid a card across the table and said we'd be hearing from the court. We did. I hired the best attorney I could find, a sharp, no-nonsense woman named Delia Frost who'd done family law for 30 years, and when she saw what they filed, even she went quiet, because Tessa hadn't come empty-handed. She'd come with a folder 2 inches thick. Cancelled checks, dozens of them, supposedly written to me over the years for Micah's care. Photographs of her at birthday parties, at Christmas, holding a younger Micah smiling. A log of phone calls, letters, receipts for clothes and toys she'd supposedly mailed. Sworn statements from people who claimed they'd seen her with him. It was a whole life, a whole devoted, present, loving motherhood laid out in paper, and not one bit of it had ever happened. Delia leveled with me in her office. "Roland, I believe you, but belief isn't evidence. You have a caregiver's affidavit and some school records. She has a paper trail. If a judge has to choose between your word and her documents, the law leans toward the biological parent. We are not in a good spot." I went home that night and I sat Micah down and I told him everything. I expected him to be scared or angry. He wasn't either. He listened to the whole thing without saying a word, lining his pencils up by length on the table the way he still did when he was thinking hard. And when I finished, he looked at a point just past my shoulder the way he does and he said, "Let her file all of it. Every page. The more she makes up, the easier this is." I asked him what he meant. He didn't explain. He just said, "I've been keeping records since I was 8, Grandpa. I keep records of everything, you know that." And he went up to his room and the light stayed on till dawn. The hearing was in the county courthouse on a gray morning that smelled like rain. Tessa sat at the far table looking every inch the wronged mother, in a navy dress, soft makeup, her hands folded and Pike beside her with that briefcase. Micah sat next to me, calm as a Sunday, with nothing in front of him but a laptop and that maddening stillness of his. Judge Hartwell was a stern woman with reading glasses she looked over more than through. She let Pike go first and he was good, I'll give him that. He walked Tessa through her whole invented history, and she answered every question in a steady, sorrowful voice. She'd visited every few months. She'd sent $500 in April of one year, $300 the next. She'd called on Micah's birthday every single year. She produced the checks, the photos, the call logs, and Pike handed each one up to the bench, and I watched Judge Hartwell's face and I couldn't read a thing on it, and my heart sank lower with every page. Delia did what she could. She put me on the stand and I told the truth. All of it, the half-empty backpack and the 4 noodles and the disconnected phone number and the 12 years of silence. But the truth, told by a tired old man, sounded thin next to that beautiful folder of lies. I could feel it slipping. I caught Pike smiling at his table. Judge Hartwell said, "Mr. Brennan, your dedication is not in question. But without any legal guardianship in place, the mother's rights remain, and her documentation is extensive. We were losing my grandson, and worse, we were teaching him that the world rewards the people who lie the loudest." And then Micah stood up. "Your Honor," he said, in that flat, clear voice of his, looking somewhere over the judge's head, "may I show you something?" Pike was on his feet instantly, objecting, saying the boy wasn't a party, this was irregular. But Judge Hartwell held up a hand. There was something in the way Micah was standing, I think, that made her curious. She told him to go ahead. He plugged his laptop into the court screen, and the first thing that came up was one of Tessa's cancelled checks, blown up big. "This check is dated June of the year I turned 7, Micah said. "My mother says she wrote it to my grandfather, but the check number is in a series this bank didn't start printing until 4 years later. I called the bank's records department. They confirmed it." He clicked. "This one has the same problem. And this one." 11 of the checks she submitted use account formats that didn't exist on the dates printed on them. The courtroom went very still. He clicked again, and a photograph came up, Tessa at what was supposed to be a birthday party. "She says this is my 8th birthday here in Ohio." Then another photo came up beside it, the same photo, but with a caption and a date, pulled from her own public social media. "She posted this picture herself 3 years after my 8th birthday from a barbecue in Florida. It's not me in the background. It's a neighbor's kid." He pulled up post after post, each one her own. Each one geotagged 1,000 miles away on the very days she'd sworn to the court she was sitting in my living room. On the day she claimed she drove up for Christmas, she'd posted photos of herself on a cruise ship off the coast of Mexico, holding a drink, smiling. Pike was objecting on every breath now, saying this was unverified, saying it could be faked. Micah never raised his voice. "I cross-referenced everything," he said. "Bank records, phone carrier records which the court subpoenaed at my grandfather's lawyer's request 6 weeks ago. Public posts with location data she made herself. The carrier records show no calls placed to our landline on a single one of the birthdays she claims she called. There were no calls, there were no visits, there was no money. In 12 years, not $1. He looked for just a second, almost directly at the judge. "I've kept a record of every day since I was 8. I have receipts for every grocery trip. I have the dates of every school meeting. I have the day she dropped me off, and I have the day she called to say she wasn't coming back. I knew that if she ever came back, it would be for money. And I knew she would lie because that's the pattern. I just needed to let her put the lies in writing first." I sat there with tears running down my face, because in that moment I understood what my grandson had been doing in his room all those late nights, the records, the dates, the careful logging I'd thought was just another one of his ways. He hadn't been protecting himself, he'd been protecting me for years, without me ever knowing. Tessa's composure cracked. The navy dress and the pearls couldn't hold it together anymore. Pike was shuffling papers and saying nothing useful, and Judge Hartwell took off her reading glasses and looked at my daughter for a long, cold moment, and then she ruled. She found Tessa's testimony not credible and her documents fraudulent. She granted me full legal guardianship of Micah, who'd be 18 in a matter of weeks anyway, and was sitting there having essentially won his own case. And then she did one more thing. She said she was referring the whole matter, the forged checks, the false statements under oath, to the district attorney for a perjury and fraud investigation. The gavel came down. Tessa made a sound like the air going out of her, and Micah just calmly unplugged his laptop and slid it back into his bag, the same careful, even movements he'd used to line up those bottle caps when he was 5. "I want to be honest with you about something, because I've thought a lot about it since. That money didn't fix anything between Tessa and me. People hear this story and they want a clean ending, a hug on the courthouse steps. It wasn't like that. $5.2 million doesn't buy back 12 years of birthdays she missed, 12 years of fevers I sat up with, 12 years she chose to be 1,000 miles away with a drink in her hand. Money is just money. It revealed exactly who my daughter had become, and that was a grief I had to sit with, a different kind of grief than burying my wife, but a grief all the same. The win in that courtroom was real, but it wasn't sweet. It was just true. On the courthouse steps, the rain finally coming down, I asked Micah how long he'd been getting ready for that day. He thought about it. Since I was 9, he said. The first time I understood that she might come back. I didn't know when. I just knew the records would matter someday. He shrugged. Money makes people do things you can predict. Here's the part I hold on to, though. A while after all the dust settled, I stood in Micah's first real office, a bright little space he'd rented in town, 6 desks and good headphones and natural light. And at one of those desks sat a young man named Andre, 22, who I happened to know because 8 years back I'd run a little Saturday woodshop for kids at the community center. And Andre had been one of them, a boy with so much energy nobody could keep him in a chair, written off by every teacher he ever had as a troublemaker. Now he was Micah's quality lead, and his teacher told me, gesturing at his screen, that he caught mistakes nobody else could see. "Mr. Brennan," Andre said to me, grinning, "your grandson's the first person who ever told me my brain wasn't a defect, said it was a feature." Every single person at those 6 desks was wired the way Micah was, the way Andre was, the way the world calls broken, and every one of them was doing work the rest of us couldn't. That night Micah and I had supper at my kitchen table, eggs and toast cut in triangles, 'cause some things he never outgrew and I never wanted him to. He set down his fork, which is how I always knew something real was coming. "I know what you gave up," he said, looking at the salt shaker instead of me. "I heard you turn down that fishing trip with your friends the year I was 9 because you wouldn't leave me with a stranger. I know you stopped seeing Mrs. Peterson because she didn't want a kid like me around. I kept a record of those too." He paused a long time. "Thank you for staying. Most people don't stay." And then my grandson, who couldn't bear to be touched when he came to me, who flinched from my hand for years, reached across that table and put his hand on top of mine and left it there. I didn't dare move. I just let it be the truest thing in the room. "You were worth every single day," I told him. "We were worth it," he said. "Both of us." Outside the window the rain had moved on and the maple in the front yard was going gold at the edges, the same yard where I'd watched my daughter's taillights disappear all those years before. But I wasn't looking at the leaving anymore. I was looking at the boy across my table who turned out to be the greatest thing that ever knocked on my door on the worst day I thought I'd ever have. So if you've made it this far with me, here's the only thing I'd ask you to carry out of this. Somewhere in your life there's a person everyone else has already given up on, a kid in the corner, a brain that doesn't fit the room, somebody waiting on exactly one person to believe they're worth the investment. Don't wait for next year to be that person. The world told me my grandson would never amount to anything, and the world was as wrong as it has ever been about anything, and all it took to prove it was a man stubborn enough to cut the toast into 4 triangles every single morning, and a boy nobody bothered to learn. Go learn somebody. You have no idea what they've been building in the dark.